Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books author reading series. If you'd like to learn more about us and our many upcoming author events, please visit skylightbooks.com, where you can browse our inventory, buy books, and join our Friends with Benefits Club. You can also follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook. To speak to a real live bookseller like me, please call 323-660-1175. Thanks for your support, and enjoy.
Gabel's debut, The Ensemble, has already earned glowing reviews. Publishers Weekly says, seldom has a novel managed to better dramatize the particular pressures that make up the life of a professional musician, from the physical pain of contorting limbs over a long period of time to the emotional stress of constantly making adjustments to the changing temperaments of partners. Celeste Ng called it a powerful debut that offers a sensitive portrait of four young musicians forging their paths through life. Asia Gabel's writing has appeared in Bomb, The Kenyon Review, Glimmer Train, and elsewhere. A former cellist, she earned her BA at Wesleyan University, her MFA at the University of Virginia, and has a PhD in literature and creative writing from the University of Houston. Asia has been the recipient of fellowships from the Sewanee Writers Conference, Literary Arts Oregon, and the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, where she was a fellow in fiction. She currently lives in Los Angeles. Maggie Shipstead is the New York Times bestselling author of the novels Astonish Me and Seating Arrangements, which won the International Dylan Thomas Prize and the LA Times Book Prize for First Fiction. She's a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, a former Wallace Stegner Fellow at Stanford, and a two-time National Magazine Award finalist for fiction. Her short stories, travel writing, essays, and criticism have appeared in many places, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, Condé Nast Traveler, Travel and Leisure, and the Best American Short Stories. We are thrilled to be hosting them this evening. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Asia Gabel and Maggie Shipstead.
Hello. Thank you for coming. You could be doing any number of things, and you're at a bookstore, which is so cool. And thanks to Skylight for hosting me. They're really cool. Come back. I'm going to read just a short passage from the early part of the book. And basically what you need to know is two of the characters in the quartet have a ideal platonic relationship, a man and a woman, Jana and Henry, and they have always slept in the same bed together after they perform, unromantically, which David told me earlier is not possible, but I think that because when you're in a quartet, you have to know each other's bodies so intimately and well that stuff like that becomes very common and easy to do, and it's almost something like a sibling best friend relationship that they have with each other. But about 5 years after they go pro, they start to have outside relationships, or Henry does. Henry, in fact, is going to have a baby, so with someone else, and so that's a source of tension between the two of them. So that's what this passage is about. One way to say it was, when they moved to New York, Jana and Henry cut back on overnights because she lived on the east side and he lived on the west side, and she hated the crosstown buses and also walking across the park alone, especially with her violin, and there were so many people in their lives, so many people in New York City, that time alone became sacred and rare. Another way to say it was, they were older, had grown up and out of it, no longer needed the physical rampancy and secret comfort of each other's bodies in bed after a blood-flushing concert or a brutal, prickly rehearsal. Another way to say it was, the practice had marched right up to the edge of being inappropriate, and enough was enough. They never had sex, not even close. There'd been nothing sexually charged about their relationship. Nothing really romantic either, unless you counted that feeling of mutual recognition when someone wraps her body around yours and you both go unconscious. And one more way to say it was, the context changed. They were no longer scrappy and trying to make it in San Francisco. Now they were emerging, as the Juilliard intern who wrote their bios liked to put it, though Henry wondered how long you could be emerging until you were simply standing in a doorway of an empty room, emerged yet unnoticed. At Juilliard, they were treated as professionals, serious adults with serious endeavors, and their habit of co-sleeping suddenly seemed a childish leftover from a past and lesser life. They had taken a little while to figure this out. The last time Jana had come to Henry's, it was a night in early December, right as the season was beginning to slip into winter. The two of them, having grown up in the wet but generous winters of California, usually felt giddy and quaint, huddled under the layers of thin blankets. Still charming was the way the street lamps flooded bronze light through the windows, even with all the lights off, casting an anemic pallor on their cold cheeks. Still eccentric was the incessant honking and yelping, the churn of lives always in progress just outside the apartment walls. But that night they'd fought, a fight that, in their pajamas in bed in the middle of the city, felt like a point from which they would not turn back. That evening they'd gone, with Britt and Daniel, who were the other two members of the quartet, to a performance of the Guarneri Quartet at Carnegie Hall. They'd had to go, really. Their dean regularly invited them to concerts so they could meet other groups and become familiar faces, to programming officers at the various venues. Afterward, there was a party in a small, narrow cocktail bar across the street. Daniel and Jana had charged forward into the crowd, always the determined, well-spoken face of the quartet, neither from that Tony world, but both able to talk to moneyed patrons with a studied fluency. Henry often ran out of things to talk about with these people after they were done marveling at his youth. He noticed Britt spending an inordinately long time at the bar deciding what to drink, and when she finally had a glass of red wine in her hand, she remained staring at the rows of liquor bottles, her back to the crowd. Henry walked up beside her. "Are you as bored?" And she jumped in her seat, tipping her glass and sending drops of red wine onto the front of his suit. "Oh, Henry," she said, dabbing at his jacket with a bar napkin. "I'm sorry, this looks expensive. Was it expensive?" It was expensive, but Henry hadn't paid for it. His mother had. A gift upon learning they had landed the Juilliard residency. "It's nothing," Henry said. Britt frowned. "Well, it's sort of your fault anyway." Henry sat next to her and ordered a gin and tonic. The compact, buttoned-up bartender peered at him suspiciously, but didn't card him. Britt had been in a mood lately. Really, she'd been in a mood for at least 3 years. Though neither Britt nor Daniel had ever explicitly spoken of it, Henry and Jana knew there'd been something between them early on, a romantic scuffle, a fast fizzle, and a subterranean burn as it faded away. The topic hadn't much come up during Henry and Jana's overnights either. What was there to discuss? It had been years since whatever had once been between Daniel and Britt appeared to settle into a semi-comfortable stasis, a slightly charged status quo, with Daniel's rotation of forgettable girls, unremarkable 2 or 3 month relationships, and Britt's steady low-grade longing for him, dignified in the shadows when he was waiting, and girlishly undulating when he turned his attention to her in intermission. Though lately something felt like it was shifting with Britt and Daniel, probably not unrelated to Britt's new boyfriend, Paul. "I was going to say you seem quiet tonight, but not with a mouth like that," Henry said. "Why do people always say that to me? You seem quiet." "What should I say back?" "Yes, that's because I don't want to talk." "Okay, well," Henry said, standing. No, Britt said. Britt put her hand on his arm. "Sit down. I'd rather talk to you than anyone else here." "Oh, wow, thanks." "I don't mean that, I just mean," she gestured across the bar toward where Jana and Daniel held captive a collection of miniature elderly ladies in chunky necklaces. "I just mean them." Henry could tell, even from this distance, that Daniel's suit, the only one he had, fit even worse than the last time he'd worn it. The cuffs now revealed his wrists. Were Daniel's irregularly long arms growing longer? Was that possible? Henry saw the seams were gray from years of pulling. When was Daniel's birthday? Perhaps Henry could get him a custom suit of his own. No, he'd be resentful. Daniel kept taking off his glasses and putting them back on and taking them off. He hated wearing his glasses. He had once told Henry something about how they represented an evolutionary weakness, but he seemed to be squinting more and more these days at things other than just sheet music. Jana, seen from afar, was all strange planes and angles. She was the sort of woman who was not exactly pretty but striking, not slender but skinny, someone who could look alarmingly different with the slight jut of a chin, a nose that could be pointed and regal in profile, and unfortunately knobbed head-on, large eyes that were anime when tired, toothsome with the right smile. She was mutable even down to her dark hair, which could make her look boyish when it was tied back or halting across her shoulders. It was just like Jana to deny anyone a firm hold on her. Brit always looked the same. Freckles, plump skin, smile lines, pale and blonde, sincere and kind, and Henry realized, sitting there, that he was grateful for her dispositional consistency. This is their natural habitat, Henry said. They can be easily adored. Once he said it, he saw it was mean, but Brit smiled a little. Or they can become people who are easily adored. At these things, I always feel like when I'm talking to someone, I have to apologize for how just boring I am. I play the violin. What more can I say? Look, listen to Janet. You can hear her from here. That pitch is unnatural. Janet threw her head back and laughed, a shrill laugh that Henry knew contained seething beneath the surface. She could communicate with this crowd, but she didn't like it. It's not too bad, Henry said. At least we have them to do it for us. They're not doing it for us, Brit said. Whoa, Henry said. Do you have something you want to tell, Henry? What about this new Paul fellow? Brit softened and told him about Paul, how she could tell he cleaned his apartment before she came over, how she'd found a scribbled list of things from his day he wanted to make sure to tell her on his bedside table, how whenever she asked him a question, he always asked her one back. Sounds like a good one, Henry said when she finished. So why are you so angry right now? I'm not angry, she said. Is it because you're angry at yourself for spending so much time pining for that guy in the bad suit over there? Brit went silent, though she leaned her head into his shoulder, drank her wine at the side of her mouth. From behind, from Jana's point of view, it must have looked like something else, at least fleetingly, because after the brief moments during which Henry felt tenderness for Brit's blonde head beneath his, but before he could say anything more, Jana was there, behind him, her hand in his hair. His hair. You both need haircuts, Jana said, and Brit withdrew. Jana was scratching his scalp with her fingernails, sending white shivers down his neck, and the way the response was both automatic and charged irritated him. Now he linked the touch to Kimiko's touch. A different woman, a different context, a different impulse. The point where the wires crossed was buzzing electric, and it stayed lit inside him all night. Later that night, in bed, after Jana scooted toward him, cold under the quilt, he said, "Don't do that again to my hair." Jana paused, a siren wailed by. I was just saying you need a haircut. I mean, seriously, you do. There's a public face we have to maintain. People could get the wrong idea, he said. What, with Brit nuzzling you in a bar? Sure. They volleyed back and forth a few times, their barbs getting hollower as they got meaner. This kind of meanness was meant for people having sex, people who could later expunge the meanness in the half-tender, half-violent act of merging. Aren't you sleeping with anyone? He said. You know I'm sleeping with Kimiko, right? Of course she knew. Henry knew she knew. He also knew Jana had no intention of having a sexual relationship with him, and that his accusation was low and undermined years of tangled but necessary friendship, and that once he'd made it, the nights together were over. The dark room momentarily choked on itself. He actually coughed. Jana rolled over, her back to him. You're right, I don't think I should spend the night here anymore. And with that, she made it his idea and her decision. She fell asleep fast and easy. When Jana made a decision, she did not unmake it, and Henry lay awake most of the night. It was the right thing to do for both of them, so why did it feel bad? There was life right out there, sirens and clanking bottles and the crazy bellowing man in the building across the way. It couldn't be more different from their life in San Francisco, all sky and studiousness and sea splash. Couldn't she also see things were changing, had in fact already changed? The next morning he awoke to Jana fully dressed. She'd smartly brought a change of clothes, black leggings, a black tunic, now cold and almost Slavic at this angle, and tiptoeing around his chilly room. What she looked like wasn't slippery at all, he saw now. Her face was serious, the aquiline nose and whittled jaw, but really it was the face of a girl trying out expressions and postures, its origin withheld from him now. He watched her gathering her things, but also lightly grazing his things with her fingertips, his clothes and his dresser and his records stacked on the floor, feeling for what he couldn't say, feeling the varnish on his viola, the tips of the metal music stand in the corner, the molding around the doorway. Henry watched her know with her hands the stuff of his life, and then thought to himself, this stuff isn't my life. My life's out there. And he realized that his context had changed, but Jenna's hadn't. Thanks.
Hello. So excited to be here with all of you, celebrating this wonderful writer and this wonderful first book that's all over the internet and is now all over real life bookstores. And yeah, so we're going to chat for a little bit, and then you guys will have a chance to ask questions, so start thinking. You'll be judged on them. So Asia, I read this book, for the first time probably a year ago. And so when I was rereading it, now that it's out and available, and I went back and read the first chapter and was immediately sucked in. I was like, no, I'm just going to skim through and remind myself, but instead I just started reading from the beginning. And it opens with this question of whether or not a piece of music is a love story. And so my question for you about this book is this a love story?
Yes, I think it's the love story I always wanted to write, and I don't think the reason that's the first line. Wait, what's the first line? It's a love story.
It's a statement.
The first statement is not a question.
But she disagrees.
Yeah, she disagrees. And I think they're all kind of wrong in the beginning. They all sort of think, they don't understand what a love story is in the beginning. I think a lot of people think a love story is like a story of romantic infatuation or lust, and I think it's about intimacy, which is different and comes in all kinds of different flavors and pairings, and I think when you like dedicate your life to 3 other people that are not your spouses, there's like a weird kind of intimacy that happens. It's physical, it's emotional, it's intellectual, and it's really easy to get fucked up. But that's what I was interested in. Like, we can all tell the story of like lust, but it's harder to tell a story about like the way you can lay with someone in bed and it's not sexual, but it's really vulnerable, and then that's kind of what I wanted to talk about.
And I think it's an intimacy that almost takes them by surprise. Like, it accrues slowly over the years, and when they enter into it, it's not necessarily a purposeful, lifelong bond. It's something that kind of is life. Like, it's their lives unfolding together as a group.
Yeah, the first title for this book was Unlikely Marriages, and then my editor made me change it because she said it sounds like a book about marriage, and then it would have to have like a pink cover or something, I don't know. But I still think that's like accidental marriage is still like the kind of the essence of it. Like, it does become what their life is. Like, these relationships become their life, but it does take years the way that a marriage does, I imagine. I've never been married, but
soon though. Just recently engaged.
Yeah, so I still think that's the most accurate metaphor.
Interesting. And so Asia is a classically trained cellist. And so to me, reading this as well, your experience as a musician creates this opportunity for sort of new insight and new kind of stories that people might not necessarily be familiar with. Like, when you were introducing the section you read, you talked about the physicality of playing together, and I think that's not necessarily the first thing people think of when they think of classical music. So for you, what were some of the challenges about writing about music and musicians?
Well, I think it wasn't really a challenge because there is a misconception about what classical music is among people who don't know it, and like, it's really fun to just debunk that. That's like a very easy, I think much harder to write about like a marriage that like everybody knows about. Like, this is a kind of union that people think they have ideas about that's like fun to delve into, like, oh no, there's a physical aspect to it, and there is a romantic part of it, and then what happens when those people get relationships outside of those relationships, and what happens when you like are 22 when you start and then you're 50, like how do you still have the same relationship with someone? So that was like an easy thing to do. I think that, you know, I don't know, do you agree with, like, because you wrote about a specific world with ballet, like, was it hard for you?
Well, see, this was another one of my questions. Thanks for jumping in. Which is that for me, I like to write about subcultures, but always as an outsider. And for you, I think sometimes when you're writing about subculture as an insider, the sort of sense of responsibility can be different.
Yeah. It's more like, because I didn't become a professional musician, I always had this like bank of knowledge that the people that I was spending time with were not musicians at a certain point. Like at 20, I was no longer like only hanging out with musicians. And so to explain what that was, and then also to discover how different and separate it was, and how much it was not what people think it is, was a story that I had to tell myself for many years before I could write it. So I think it was like a process of me discovering that it was special before I even started to write about it. Because for a long time I didn't think it was special. It was just like this thing that I did. Like you ran track and I played music, and like I just didn't think it was something people would be interested in. And not until someone was like, what can you write 300 pages about? And I was like, I like watch reality TV. Music. So
I would read your novel about reality TV as well.
okay.
Well, so then you moved from being a serious artist of one sort and being a serious artist of another. And do you think your sort of background and your practice as a musician informed your life as a writer?
They're very different. Like, everyone, you know, writing is super solitary and lonely, and chamber music is really collaborative, and when I sit down to practice, I know exactly what I'm playing. There's like, it's already written for me. Like, I know exactly the exercise that you're supposed to do and how to get there. And when I sit down to write, I have no idea what's going to happen, even especially if you try to plan it out. Like, it doesn't ever happen that way. So Chris Tillman, when I was in my MFA, said it's good for writers to have a second art, so that they can understand this is the only thing.
Man.
Yeah, I can't have my job. I have to make room for my second art. Just so that it's like good to know that like not all art is the same, and that's totally fine and good. Yeah, I struggle to like connect the two, but anything that I would say is like sounds really facile. I think like they're different, and that's cool and okay.
Well, why don't you tell us kind of the origin story of this book? Like, at what point did the idea emerge? How did it germinate? How has it changed?
Yeah. Well, there's one story I tell when it's like written down, and this is not written down, so I'm gonna tell that one. This one's like, because so I studied with the St. Lawrence String Quartet at Stanford for like 3 summers when I was young. I mean, I was like 15, I wasn't that young, but they're a professional quartet. They're amazing. They're Canadian. I stole a lot of stuff from them for this book. I hope they're not mad. I told them about it, and no one ever replied to me. So, but they were so you spend like 12 days there, and they like coach you intensely. It's like so exhausting. But in one of the coaching sessions, like you get coached in the morning by one person, and then you have a break, and then in the afternoon you're coached by a different person, and they were clearly arguing with each other. Like she in the afternoon was like, don't do what Barry said. Like we hate Barry. Yeah. And I was like, you hate Barry. Like you have to work with him forever. Like he's no longer in the quartet, but that opened up that revelation, because I think I thought that they were so above like interpersonal drama, and I just didn't realize that they could have petty fights and then take it out on like me, who was like 15 and didn't know what was happening. And I was like, oh, that's like complicated for them. Like they have to do this thing and this other thing. And And then later, like years later, someone else was at some other conference with him, and there was I can't tell that story, but there's like scandal and drama. There's a hot tub involved. If you read the book, the hot tub scene that I put in there is like inspired by. So I don't know, just like salaciousness in a world that's super elite is like really exciting to me. Like yeah.
But wait, so when it was like you're in grad school and you wrote a story and it sort of evolved into this, or?
When I was in MFA and agent, your agent, Rebecca came to town and they were like, you have to propose novels to her, and I was like, I'm 24, like I don't know how to write a novel, and we had to, like, so I wrote a novel proposal, and I remember sitting in that meeting with her, and she was like, this is like an idea, and I was like, yeah, it's like what I have, like I wrote a whole thing that was stupid and read like a romance novel, like an airport novel or something. That was like really mean of me to say, not an airport novel, but like a whatever, like a novel I didn't want to write, and I never let that go. I couldn't write it though. Like I couldn't figure out how to do it. And then I proposed it again at Houston in my PhD, because they made us propose novels. Like, and I was like, why are people making me do this? This is awful. Like I don't want to write one. And I wrote the first 10 pages of this novel that I then eventually cut. But like those 10 pages stayed. The first 10 pages for like years. Really, I don't know. And then it just took a really long time for me to figure out the structure and even what I was saying. It just took a long time. But I guess it was good that people like forced me to do it.
I feel like, sometimes that is helpful just to have it sort of in the back of your mind for a while. Kind of doing its own thing in the darkness.
Yeah.
Until the right time arrives.
Yeah, I'm glad that like nothing I wrote back then saw the light of day.
Was there a moment when it kind of fell into place? Or was it a long, gradual chipping away?
No, it fell into place. Like I wrote the first 100 pages like 4 times. Because at one point it was like all one weekend, which is insane. Like I was like, it's one performance over one weekend. And it's like moment by moment. And then I tried to do that and I was like, that's crazy. Like Ian McEwan's Saturday is one of my not favorite, but I love that book, and it does take place on a day, and and Mrs. Dalloway, like I like novels that do that, but I can't do it. And then I was like, okay, it takes place over like 1 year, and then it's in sonata form, and so there'll be like an introduction and development and a Sturm and Drang like part of it, and it just like was crazy. And then I just finally just let go of the formal structure and decided to just like rotate through the voices in a way that felt natural, which is probably like what should have happened in the first place.
Yeah, I love that about the book, because we start in Jana's point of view. She's the first violinist, so it's logical that's where we start. But really quickly we start this movement, and it sort of becomes something that's more collective. So, I mean, what was it like kind of bringing together the mechanics, you were sort of speaking this already, of a novel versus the mechanics of chamber music?
Yeah. The benefit of music and chamber music is that you get to hear everything at once. Like, you just hear everything at once. And that was hard for me because you can only write one person, unless you're like crazy, and then you can do this weird omniscient thing. But I didn't want to do a thing like that. So it's hard to like have the sound of many voices, but only hear one person. And so I think it takes until like a page 100 where you can start to like know all of them, and then you start to hear it bigger. And that's just something I had to like deal with and be okay with. Mm-hmm. But that means the beginning is like I guess it is kind of the development part of the piece. But yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how did you think about sort of connecting there? Because that was another interesting thing in the first chapter when Jana's sort of having a flirtation with a famous violinist, and he says, you could be much better. And she sort of is ruffled, and he's like, no, you will be much better as you get older. And so that there's this, accumulation of skill that continues through their lives and then starts to be pushed against by the kind of physical wear and tear of playing this much. So, yeah, I mean, how did you think about portraying their maturation as just humans together and also as musicians?
Well, I think this book is not really about, I mean, it's not about music, it's about people.
Sure.
And they just happen to be musicians. And so they mature in the way that, like, everybody else does. And they have, like, problems the way everybody else does. They just happen to have to do this, like, weird thing while they're doing it. And so I tried to show that difference in the music, that, like, growth in the music through what they're playing. Like, so there's a program at the beginning of every section with music that they play, and the piece that they focus on in that section represents something, hopefully, that represents it for me. Like, in the beginning they're playing the Dvorak American, which really straddles the line between student and professional, and so that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to, like, make it professionally, and they really struggle with that. And then in the second section, like, there's a lot of tension and anger between all of them, and they play the Shostakovich, which is like no one does anger and tension better than him, and so hopefully that communicates this, like, maturation process that they go through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they do grow up like normal people, but like normal people who are in a very small cult at the same time.
Yeah.
And so much of their time is spent together, and things that we sort of maybe act out with people we encounter come by, they're all sort of going through with this, like, small pod of people, and then, like, more people get drawn in here and there, but this really becomes, like, their core relationship.
Yeah, that's, like, so scary, like, to think about having to be the wife or husband of a person in a group like this. Like, if you're jealous at all, like, you can't do it because it's so much time, and they know that person so well forever.
And in a way that's inaccessible to you.
Yeah.
If you're not part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, like, you and I know each other because we could, like, talk about books and stuff, but, like, we're not, like, writing books together for our entire lives. Like, that would be intense. And
or we don't sit together to write and just signal with, like, an indrawn breath that, like, now we begin.
Could we do that? Like, maybe. No, that sounds terrible. Yeah.
Well, I might open it up to the floor if anyone has questions. I have a few more if you don't, but I want to make sure everyone has a chance.
Everybody should have two arts.
Mm-hmm.
Can you riff more on what the relationship between those two are like? Are they, like, jealous of each other, or do they, how do those two arts?
Well, like, he didn't expand further on that, but I took it to mean, like, so you have a place to put the tension and frustration you feel in one art into something else, because sometimes you're writing and it's not going anywhere, and that maybe that happens for, like, years, and it's good to have something else creative that you can do that where you can put that instead of, like, cycling it back into, like, your Word doc, which I've done before. I found myself, like, wanting to play the piano again when I was writing, just because, like, it's easier to do. Like, I'm not good at piano, but it's, like, easy to, like, the notes are already there. You just have to, like, do it over and over again, and it's different with writing. I'm sure a professional pianist feels differently about that, but that's what I took that to mean. Like, it's good to not just depend on one outlet.
How do you know which one's your best art?
Well, I only did 2. Like, I just know that's a good question. I mean, I had to stop playing competing because I wasn't good enough, and that's because you stop, like, winning things. Like, that's very clear. I think Maggie and I had this conversation too, like, how do you know when to give up? Like, how do you know you're not good at writing? Like, I don't know, because at some point you have to take the external forces that are saying, like, someone else is better, like, we're going to give them the money. For a long time you have to ignore that, and then at some point you have to be like, oh, maybe I'm not supposed to do this, like, no matter how much I love it, and that's why it's good to have 2.
be a really short question and probably a short answer, but I just noticed.
Yanny.
Yeah.
The first meme of the evening has arrived.
Musically, the sentence work in this book is so impressive, and I'm just sort of wondering if there is a relationship for you between your musical practice or your musical interests and the craft of writing and sentence work.
That's not a short answer.
It is for me.
What if I was just like, yes? I don't think consciously, but in like the PhD defense, one of my committee members who was outside of the department, who was not in the English department, was like, there's a lot of long sentences, like, and why? Like, why? And I didn't consciously, it was a good question because it made me think about it, but the answer I think that I gave was like, because when those long sentences happen when they're like emotionally at a climax, and I felt like, because they felt like breathless and had lost rhythm, that the language needed to too, and I think that's as far as it goes. Like, that's how I think about the sentences musically.
You touched a little bit on the little playlists that you have at the beginning of every chapter, and so I was wondering what your ideal version is of people who are reading this book who are not familiar with classical music. How do they interact with those playlists? Like, did you imagine people listening to those while they're reading, or making themselves familiar with it before they read that chapter, or how would you suggest somebody who's not familiar with to experience the music at the same time as the novel?
That sounds like I'm giving them homework. And they don't. I hope the book works without them listening to it ever. I hope that they do listen to it, because I love those pieces, and I think that it's enriches the experience. But the way that I wrote them playing those pieces, like, it wouldn't really, like, unless you were like Dvorak, you're not gonna know really like the moment that I'm talking about, unless you go back and you like trace it back and listen to it. Like, hopefully it doesn't matter, but hopefully it's also an extra layer, like, that can work. But yeah.
We've talked about the two arts, so when was the moment when you were like, I'm going to start writing fiction, now is the time for my second art?
Well, I always wrote fiction.
Did you as a child?
My mom just found all these boxes in the garage of like when I was, I was like 13, and we had, those computers that were like black and had like MS-DOS and like the green, like, I wrote an entire novel about a violinist when I was like very little, and I like printed out those papers so I get to tear them perverted. I hope it's in those boxes, but she said she found a bunch of stuff. But yeah, I just thought it was like fantasy life, like I thought it was like play life. And then I didn't realize you could do it for a profession till I was in college, and someone was like, have you heard of MFAs? And I was like, what's an MFA? So I just didn't realize you could do it. I always knew you could do music. I just didn't know writers, so I like didn't know that was a thing. But yeah, it was probably when Alex Chi said to me, like, you should think about MFAs, that I was like, oh, it's a thing. Okay, like, I'll do that. Since I'm really like running out of steam on this like professional cellist track. Excuse me.
What I loved, I'm a big fan of your book, but what I loved was the two male characters in the story and how you explored inborn talent and one who has to strive to succeed. And I'd love to know a little bit more about what inspired you to discuss that conflict within your book.
Because I think I was that one character you're talking about who's like loves it and isn't. His love outweighs his natural abilities. And I think that's like kind of a tragedy. I don't think it means you can't do it. I just think it means you always have to try harder than everyone else. And I saw that future. Like, there was a moment when I could have applied to conservatory when I was 17, and I didn't, because I knew it would just be like decades of like failure, like, or not failure, which is like, just always the risk of failure, and in a way where I wasn't sure that I could ever succeed the way I imagined was possible. And I think some people do choose that life though, and that's like, I was interested in how that like works and what kind of person you have to be. Like, you have to really, really, really love it and be willing to suffer forever. And I'm just like not.
Well, this has worked out.
Yeah, I think it's okay. Yeah.
Anyone else? You're signing copies for people, I assume? Yeah.
So there's cake.
There's cake.
It's a red
It has
velvet.
the book on it, so you'll know that's the right cake.
Yeah.
There's champagne. And yeah. Thanks everybody.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget, you can listen to this and all of our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.